We are live. This is your brother Asar Imhotep with the Diopian Institute for the Advancement of Science and Culture. Today is Friday, August the 28th, and we have with us a special guest, Dr. Alice Nicholas, who is an Africologist and poet. And so we'll delve more into her life and her work in just a moment. So y'all hold tight. Indeed. Again, like to welcome everyone who is listening live. It's been a lot going on this week. I know I didn't do a show last week. That's because I was in the midst of travels, visiting family and friends and trying to avoid 2 hurricanes, coming into H-Town. And as soon as I left, they decided it wasn't worth coming to Houston. So they went into Louisiana and did their damage there. So bummed either way it goes. I have family in both states. So everyone is good though. And I hope everyone who has family members there that they're good and straight. But yeah, climate change has the weather acting all kind of wacky and all. But as usual, I want to thank everyone, who is, listening to us live and listening to us via the archives. And we will be having some more, dynamic interviews and shows coming up. So if you have not subscribed to the channel, I want you to hit that subscribe button and make sure that you hit the bell that lets us know, will let you know when I'm doing shows so that you can set the reminders for yourself and you can get notices when we are doing these live shows. So we appreciate you joining us today and joining us in this conversation with Brother Asar is Dr. Alice Nicholas, who is an Africologist and lecturer in the Department of Africana Studies at California State University, Dominguez Hills. She is an alumni of the said university, earning both a BA, a dual major in Africana Studies and English, and her MA in Africology, a program in which she created. She earned also her doctorate in Africology and African American Studies from Temple University in 2019. Dr. Nicholas' research focuses on literature of the African diaspora and the creation of Afrocentric literature theory, used specifically in the examination of the role of Black women's literature as a liberatory device. She has received several grants and research awards, including the Stephen Colvian, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Memorial Award and the Temple University Community Research Award, as well as the Certificate of Scholarly Advancement from the Diopian Institute for Scholarly Advancement. And it is at the DIOP conferences where I've had the opportunity to meet her personally. And now y'all get to meet her. So welcome to the program, Dr. Nicholas. How are you doing?
Hi, how are you?
I am well. First and foremost, thank you for joining us. And, I know the school semester has just started and y'all are very busy adapting to the new way that school is being done for a lot of folks due to COVID-19. I'm currently in school now and I've been online, so I'm used to it. All my classes, are online. So I didn't get no breaks whatsoever due to COVID-19. But so I'm glad that you have taken time out of your busy day to join us and give us some insights into who you are and the work that you do. So since you are new to this audience, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself in terms of, where you grew up, your educational interest, just your life interest, and then what led you down the path of Africana studies, and more specifically, the Africological path, in that grander scheme of things.
I am Californian, born and raised. I was born in San Francisco, actually, but raised in Los Angeles. So I call it home, and I tie it to how Zora Neale Hurston called Edenville home, even though she was born in Alabama. She was raised in this place, so LA is my home. I was educated in LA, but I was also bused. I was bused to Valley School, which was a bit of a culture shock, not for me, but I think for the students in the Valley School. And there was this concerted effort between myself and who I call my foundational friends, my oldest friends. We created the Black Awareness Club because in 1979, 1980, how are you not aware of Black awareness? So that's when it began, and we petitioned for some Black professors, some representation. So we got an English teacher, and then we got a choir director. We took African American Studies for Black History Week as a day that they gave us in the 10th grade. We took the week in the 11th grade, and by the time we were seniors, we had the full month of February. Always, I've always had this interest in more than just this surface African American history or surface Black history, but the other side of it, because a lot of it through the education, through conversations with classmates that didn't have the same experiences that I had. Realizing there are different perspectives, and I want to find out these other ones.
Indeed.
Cal State Dominguez Hills. I love this campus. Most people that attend Dominguez Hills love that campus. There's just something about it when you walk on the campus. So as an undergrad, I knew I would be back to work on my master's. But when I wanted to get a master's in, at the time, Africana Studies, it didn't exist. So you have to go through interdisciplinary studies. But interdisciplinary studies at the time, I don't know if they still do, but at the time they allowed you to name your major. And I'd been reading a lot of Dr. Molefi Kete Asante. So I was like, Africology, of course. So I applied for it. I made sure that it was on all of my paperwork because I knew that it would be a fight, and it was. I was in attendance in the PhD program at Temple after graduating, walking the stage, and they wanted to pull the master's for some unknown reason. And I wouldn't even listen. I was like, oh, I know what they wanted to do. They wanted to call it interdisciplinary studies. They didn't want to call it Africology. But my transcripts say Africology. So I had to return my diploma, and they had to print Africology.
That's interesting. Before I do, I like to acknowledge Medics 82 for your contribution to the channel, and everyone for their continued support of this channel. And shout out to Robert Rand and Don Williams, and I am not Pablo, and Eric George and Sister Mika Florida for joining us in the chat room. OG Gorilla, thank you for joining us, and anyone else who hasn't made themselves known at the moment, both on Facebook and on YouTube. So I'm starting to get the Facebook, I guess, on the Asarum Hotep page before they wouldn't post my Facebook chat comments, in the in here, but now they are. So, good that they're fixing that. Peace to Rashu. Thank you for joining us. So you have to fight to get Africology, as a master's program there. Is it now yet a department, or is that a goal there for the PhD level?
That's a goal, ultimately. I would love to be at this campus just until, right? But the goal would be to have an Institute of Africological Study and then a department, of Africology that offers MA and PhD. We definitely know it can be done. So it's all a matter of how much support.
Indeed. And so we'll get to your book in a moment, but I want to kind of go back a little bit and discuss your early love for writing itself, and more specifically poetry. And I should ask, does this include fiction storytelling writing outside of just poetry? So that's a question, but I also want you to discuss your introduction and love, for poetry itself, and how that, came about.
My parents both are big readers. My father still is. My mother is an ancestor. But I've always been around these eclectic offerings on these bookshelves. And I was always drawn to Nikki Giovanni, Amiri Baraka. These kind of poets, like I can still remember on one of the bookshelves was this white book cover with big black block printing that said Black poets, and I was just always drawn to that. And then it became this comfortable thing. We speak the same language. We have the same rhythm. I'm open to writing everything, though, because I am an academic, right? So I have to write stop papers, encyclopedia entries. But I'm drawn to fiction because in fiction, you can do almost anything. Octavia Butler did everything. So I'm drawn to it all. The writing process is just my thing.
Now, I was just going to ask you who were some of your, in terms of, I'll ask this, in terms of fiction, is there any particular genre? So we know that Octavia Butler is kind of sci-fi, and so is you more drawn to, I guess, what they would call it Afrofuturism now, or is it more kind of drama, romantic? What's your, is there a specific genre that you love, saying the most and deal with, or are you kind of open to, a variety of different forms of fiction, so to speak?
Definitely open to a variety of it. Now, my number one would be Zora Neale Hurston, who wrote just about everything: short story, fiction, poetry, plays, newspaper articles, opinion. So autobiography. She wrote a little bit of everything, and she's a major influence on who I am. I would consider myself a cross genre because I like the ability to be able to pull from everywhere, read something new.
So do you plan on writing any plays or, writing any sci-fi, in the near future? Are those in the works, you have some ideas ready to
Yeah,
go?
yes, I certainly do. And this is more fiction,
Hmm.
but would be historical fiction.
Hmm.
And um, I'm already outlining. I'm already ready. I'm probably about 25,000 words in.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think we should always have something on the fire.
Hmm.
So when I released, Reflections of an Africologist, it opened up that time to work on the next.
We might have to hook up in the future. So I'm an aspiring film person, uh, and want to explore, even if it's just a short film version of what is to come. I want to test my skills, in the film. Now, I asked, do you, in terms of your poetry, are you a performance? Like, I do spoken word as well, or at least poetry I write, but I like to write to perform. Like, I'm a performer, when it comes to the poetry, more so than the written word solely. But do you perform, the your poetry? Are you one of them, uh, to give the stereotype? What was that movie that everyone loves and hates at the same time? If you're a poet,
Love
uh,
Jones.
Love Jones. You know what I'm saying? Or were you at the smoky clubs? Doing your spoken word? Or are you more? I'm a. If I do read, it's more so in a like a bookstore intimate, type reading like that. How do you put yourself? How do you see yourself in that light?
I'm cross genre. I'm always me. Uh, but I can be at home on a stage at a university or in a smoky coffee house upstairs. I'm
Mm,
one of the Park poets, and so I started off in the Leimert Park Village here in Los Angeles at a coffee house called Fifth Street Gigs. And it was a jazz club, coffee house, and you would have to walk up these tiny stairs and go up into this dark room with the spotlight directly on you and just read. And it was more of a vibe than a location.
mm,
So I like those spaces. The world stage was more, or is, because it's still going on. And I attended one of their online workshops. This is a place where you can go and workshop to
mm,
build your muscles. I also hosted one of the longest running spoken word and poetry venues in Los Angeles, spreading love and spoken words at Magic Johnson Starbucks. Every
mm,
Wednesday, myself, Sandra Lorraine Coleman, and Misty Muse, Victor S. Van Taylor was our musical director. So I did it all, and I
mm.
enjoyed it all. But in this space now, I'm more, because there's so much else going on, and I feel like there's so much that I want to do that I can't do it all, so I have to let certain things go, and hopefully the future will make room for it. I love being on the stage.
Yeah, Los Angeles is one of the few places I have yet to perform. There was a time where I used to just travel the country and go to open mics and do features and things of that nature, but I never made it to Cali for some reason. I went as far as Arizona in terms of going west, but it's always just been kind of central, United States, Arizona, as far as west, and then of course up and down the East Coast and the South. Um, but I would love to check out the LA poetry scene, and it reminds me of the fact that like I always wanted at the DIOP conference, not necessarily a part of the DIOP conference, but if like there was like a open mic poetry night or something like that, like that Friday or that Saturday night, I would just love for there to be something like that, because I meet so many people who do spoken word at saying the conference, and so it's a lot of intellectuals and academics who we know them for their, their serious and scholarly writing, but many may not see this other side where they're more creative and expressive. And maybe I have to talk to the organizers one day and see if we can get something popping. But we mentioned your book, earlier, The Reflections of an Africologist, 10 Million Stories, Volume 9. And can you, tell us a little bit about what this book is about, and how did you come up? You mentioned in the book, this history of the 10 million stories. And so what is the objective, of this 10 million stories? How does this, fit into that? And how do we jump to volume 9, in this series?
10 million stories. Black people have been talked about. One story has been attached to us. And I was thinking, just here in LA, we got 10 million stories. And so 1999 started it off. My goal, it's a lofty goal, but it'll definitely keep me here a little bit longer, is to share 2 million stories. Part of that is volume 8, which I call the living biography series. So instead of going 8, 9, and 10 for the living biography, I do 8.1, 8.2, and this is to celebrate the women that are basically keeping our villages alive. The nurses, the mothers, the neighbors, the one that look out for you without even having to ask, So I'd like to tell their stories too. So I started the volume 8 series just to.
And so when we look at the book, it is kind of a mixture of poetry and like these short articles kind of detailing. And so if I understand correctly, this book comes about as a result of a series of weekly journals that you kept or created during your PhD process, or even maybe earlier. But tell us, how that came about, and how did you decide to utilize those journal entries as kind of chapters or whatnot for the text?
They document my lived experiences, and so it was a way. Initially, it was an exercise. I wanted to build up writing stamina. I've always written, but this was something different because this caused me to not just be inspired to write something. It was an intentional, and timed exercise. So it became this exercise in building up the writing stamina for the dissertation, which is no joke, but it's only been a year, so I'm still okay. But it helped me to build up that writing stamina. Now, what happened was I started getting feedback. This really spoke to me, or I feel the same exact way, or I've had this experience, or I never thought of it that way. And it was tied to some things that I was learning, as a PhD student in the Department of Africology. And so it all connected for me. And it was a way of releasing because, it ended up being like 255 pages. So it was time for it to be released and then move on to start working on volume 10. But the goal, the ultimate goal, is to tell 10 million of our stories.
Speaking of stories, there's this one story about a motor vehicle that you had that you gave the name Nick.
Yeah.
And if you don't mind kind of telling us that story that is written in the text, I found that to be a unique a story, an interesting story to add to the text.
My mother was a lady. She's not a Southern girl. But it was my first car, and I had gone to some, neighborhood car dealer. But I loved the color, and it was a stick shift, and it was a Mustang, and just all of that. But the interest rates were ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did was I would double up on payments, and I paid it off about a year early. So I didn't have to pay all of that money that was on the original contract. Well, I guess the owner didn't appreciate that. So he had the car repossessed. I didn't know it was repossessed. I woke up the next morning, looked out, and my car was gone. My car was my life. We were inseparable. We went everywhere together, and I think I wrote we went some places we weren't supposed to go, but we got out. And it was hard. And when I went down there, he didn't like the way I had an attitude. I have a right to be angry. Like the way I talked to him. And so he had his employees slam and lock the gate, keeping my car in the gate. And I refused to leave. And he called the police. And when he called the police, I called my mother. And my mother drove up, and I saw her before I saw the police. And when she reached down, I knew what she was doing. And she looked up and she saw the police behind me. So she reached back down, and I knew what she was doing. But she was coming, and this is her words, she was coming to have him unask my car, trying to take advantage of me. I was young, I was Black, I had already signed this contract that, something like 27% was something really ridiculous. And he missed all that money, but I got my car that day. Yeah.
And it just goes to the testament of mothers and the power of mothers, especially, of course, in protecting, their children and the lengths that they will go to ensure their safety. And so I found that a very powerful testament, to not only in terms of just the power of mothers, but in terms of planning and working harder in a sense to not pay more later. And that's a good kind of habit saying to have. And I know you talk about this the habits in your text, and how the inspiration it's not enough. You got to get into the habit of doing and writing in that specific context. And, I'm all for financial literacy and making sure we don't have to overpay just cause, just give people more money when we don't have to, saying the work strategies. And so it's kind of a dual, thing in that context. And so, speaking of mothers, we have your flashback from week 8, Mothers, Earth, Water, and Wind. If you recall that reflection, can you tell us a little bit about that? You talked about, Dr. Maathai, Wangari Maathai. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly. Her, for those who don't know her, she won like the Nobel Peace Prize for, planting trees, in Kenya or whatnot. And you're talking about Mami Watha and the earth and all of this other kind of stuff. So you can kind of give us a little synopsis of that reflection and what you got out of that kind of relationship between, Mother Earth, and just mothers in general. Can you give us a little?
The earth, the water, the wind, these are all feminine energies. And I think during that week, there was something going on every place in the world. So if it wasn't the wind, it was the water. If it wasn't the water, it was earthquakes. There was something going on almost everywhere in the earth that week. And I was thinking about how we take Mother Earth for granted. Like we can go somewhere else, we can just step off and float without anything else. and how we need to kind of respect that energy. But it's also a tribute to the Black woman because Mami Wata, of course, is a right, and then we have Oshun, an African woman. So this is also saying that if we don't take care of the African woman, then what do we have? We're earth, we're water, we're dead.
The incubator of life in general. And I remember reading up on a story of Sister Maatai, and it reminded me of a few a few testimonies coming out of ancient Kemet when they were talking about planting trees as part of their, it's a phrase called Saruj Ta, restoring the world. And in their philosophy of restoration, it included replanting, saying trees and creating, water, lakes and stuff for birds and stuff. So you have this sense that for a lot of the Egyptians, it wasn't simply, like building monuments and restoring monuments and writings and old writings, but that philosophy also included a harmonious relationship with the earth. Now, they personify the earth as masculine and the sky is feminine, and that's African wide is really kind of unusual since it's usually the reverse, in Africa, where the earth is feminine and the sky is masculine. But regardless, they saw the earth as, a source of medicine, a source of life that had to be taken care of in the same way that we take care of family and things. And so like her story, just reminded me of these conversations that were going on even in ancient Egyptian times. And it's I can't say that her name, I'm still trying to investigate her last name and what it means in her language. I'm sorry.
Matao, is it?
I haven't heard it actually pronounced. I've only read, and so I don't know if I pronounce it Ma'atai, but it could be pronounced some other kind of way. But saying that to say that her name sounds like how we would pronounce Ma'at, in a way. So it's like, like she is this personification, of what was, this ancient Egyptian deity in more ways than one, so I wanted to see if like in some way was her name even connected to that, concept, because if so, that would be, just incredible. But I want to ask you now, in terms of like when you went through your PhD process, what was your dissertation on, and how was that journey? And so you're kind of, relatively speaking, fresh, in terms of receiving the PhD. So for a lot of us who don't understand that journey and the rigors involved in getting and in earning that degree, I want to get some insight from you, and I'll ask you later in terms of tips for a lot of us who are going through that saying process now. But what was your focus during that time period?
I'm literary based, but I created a literary theory, and so I wanted to test the theory using Black women's literature, because what I was finding out is that we're very visual in our communication, and we're African, so we're also tonal in our communication. And I was wondering how that translated into the literature. So I chose Toni Morrison, Zora Hurston, and Toni Cade Bambara. And I looked at their literature in particular because I knew, because these women said it themselves, that they were writing for Black people. Toni Cade Bambara was a cultural worker. So I knew that they were writing specifically for us. And if they're writing specifically for us, then in the tradition of cultural workers, like Harriet Tubman, what else are they trying to tell? So along the Underground Railroad, the quilt codes were used, coded language was used. And I was trying to see if I could find that in the literature to see if they were sending us these messages. And I found, according to my theory, that it worked. If I looked at what they were showing us in the literature, if I looked at some of the music that they incorporated, not just the words of the music, but the tones in the music,
Mm.
I found that I could create codes. And so Toni Cade Bambara, Those Bones Are Not My Child, her masterpiece, 800 plus pages that was cut. Um, the story is shaped around this boot, right? So this map that this serial killer was taking is shaped like a boot. And then she incorporates soldiers and the sound of helicopters and the sound of drums, and drums, of course, are a call to attention. And so if we look at all of this, then she could be coding revolution for us. She with
Mm.
the tanks that come into town, with the soldiers, with the boys that are practicing marching. And like I said, with that boot check, all of what she was telling us, but one of the clues that she gives us is another coded word. Pass the duchy. I don't know if you remember that something you pass the duchy on the left hand. Well,
Mm-hmm.
we know what it is, but it was code for something else. And so the fact that she incorporates a coded message in the literature could be her message to us that she's also coding the message.
Mm.
Make sense?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And it makes me reflect on, like, I was watching something the other day, I forgot what it was, but they were talking about, it was something on YouTube. I'm mad, I can't remember. But they were talking about how, of course, Europeans could not get our speech. And it made me think that, basically our entire language, no matter where you go in the continent, in the diaspora, is code. And we pride ourselves on creating these codes. And we have this kind of internal prize if we are able to decipher it. So, like, I remember, like, in the early 90s, right, and being immersed in hip-hop culture, it was a thing for wherever borough that you stayed, that it had its own unique language and codes. And so we would, if we weren't from there, we would always try to decipher, and that would just be part of the, saying the culture, like that encryption, for those of us who are, computer savvy, like this encryption that is just part of, like, you can say it in a way that even if you don't get it, the larger culture itself gives you the kinds of patterns to be able to decipher it on the spot without necessarily knowing, saying the backstory. But that's just how we do in essence. And so I see that you're formalizing in many ways, this coded message, coded language that are in these texts. And I wonder, who you've mentioned some names that are kind of, pretty well known, but who are some contemporary folks that we may not necessarily know, but who are people we should be looking for in that literary space?
Um, you know, I'm I'm reading mostly independent writers. So Jahaz Ayanabu is she's a Los Angeles-based poet, but she's internationally known, and she regularly writes these wonderful stories. So I've been reading a lot of her Roberta Trammell. That's about it. Everything else has been academic. So,
Hmm. Yeah, I understand. It's
so the whole
it,
summer.
if you did it feel like a weight? Like I remember a friend of mine at the time, she had finished her master's, and once it was all said and done, she didn't know what to do with herself because she had all this time. It seemed like, did you have that feeling like, I just have this time, I don't know what to do at the moment, or was you just
No,
jetted,
I
directly in?
I was back in LA in June, and
Uh-huh.
I'm working at Dominguez Hills in August. I really
Right.
never had downtime. I still haven't had downtime yet.
Mm.
I'm looking forward to it. But so I haven't had it yet.
So with that said, jumping straight into the teachings, I know we kind of talked a little bit offline concerning the COVID-19 and having to do entirely online courses. And so if I understand correctly, this was your first week doing that. So how has that been, trying to engage the students without being in their physical presence?
It was, actually, I've done online teaching, I've done hybrid, but I've always had a mix of online and in class. But
Mm,
this is the first time. Every last one of my classes is enrollment is at max. We're at maximum enrollment in every one of the classes. And
mm,
then to transfer all of university, everything, even the books for the library.
mm,
So my students, it's not really safe for them to go into, how you can go in and you can check out a book for 2 hours, so I had
yeah.
to make sure everything was 100% online.
Mm,
It's a little bit different. So it's not just the teaching, but it's their resources and their access to resources.
mm,
Who has bandwidth to upload all of these fancy new programs, or who can just get on Blackboard. So you got to keep it simple for them, but you
mm,
also want to make it interesting. So yeah, Zoom, so that at least we can look at each other, and at least if there are questions that come in the moment, they can be addressed. But it's definitely a little bit different.
mm,
I'm I'm all for teaching them, so we'll just do whatever we can do to get it done.
mm,
I do miss being in the class.
mm. Yeah, that's something that I didn't really think about as well, the library access. And I would think though that at least the libraries would be open. I think that's something that you can wear a mask and not have to be you know crammed up with each other. I haven't, unless it's finals, what I'm saying, the midterms, the libraries don't be that full in any library that I've been to, except around those times. But yeah, that's something that you have to consider, because I know the books that for the stuff that I do, well, outside of the computer science stuff, there's always ebooks equivalents for those, because we're constantly updating with computer technology. So they make ebooks and things of that nature. But I'm thinking, like, when I'm doing like my Egyptology work, or certain African studies works, that this stuff is only in physical form. How do you get access to that if the libraries are closed? So, like, I haven't been in in Philly in a couple of months. But I'm pretty sure like my place was the University of Pennsylvania museum library. And so I'm wondering if that's closed, saying to the public as well. But I want to get back to, when you're going through the PhD process and the kind of tips and tricks, so to speak, for getting through that for a lot of people who, may be considering, advancing, going to get some advanced degrees, especially in Africology. And we'll get into Africology itself as a discipline. You've had the benefit of kind of going to the Mecca of Africology in terms of Temple University. So we want to tap you, saying in there, but, kind of tips and things. I know we kind of touched on a little bit in terms of the habits, but I want to, kind of delve deeper into that, for the aspiring students and the kind of discipline that they need to get that done.
It's a process, or should I say it's a series of processes. So I don't think that there's a one size fit all. What you have to do is find out the type of scholar that you are. So if you're the type of scholar that is a visual scholar, or if you're the type of scholar that's strictly the books, or if you're the type of scholar that needs to work around people, or if you need extreme quiet and earplugs, you have to find out who you are and feed into that. So if you need to be outside to work, then find a spot and get. My thing was I had to sit and do all of my reading, my serious reading, and then I had to walk because I had to process. So I did a lot of work. Be prepared. It is kind of a solitary journey because you really have to rely on self. You have your mentors, you have your chairs, you have your professors, but it's 100% up to you what you have to do. So you just have to tell yourself, I have to do what it takes to get to the end. One foot in front of the other, and just do it until it's done. Just do it until it's done.
Indeed. Now, the title of your book is Reflections of an Africologist. And so the primary question then becomes, well, what is an Africologist? And more specific, what is Africology? And what distinguishes that from other, disciplines, so to speak.
I remember asking you that question at a Jill conference. So an Africologist is a person that studies within the Afrocentric paradigm. An Africologist puts Africa at the center of perspective or theory or of understanding the world. So just like sociology studies society, biology studies, the body, and Africologist studies the African phenomenon. Like Dr. Asante wrote in Afrocentricity, what would the African do if there were no white people? So this reflections of an Africologist is me, because I'm still learning. I can call myself an Afrocentric scholar and an Africologist, but I had a very Western education for most of my education until I actually made the decision as a graduate student, as an MA student. And so a lot of times I'm correcting as I go. I'm revisiting. But the goal is to be that powerful African-centered woman scholar, being.
How would your work would have been different had you not had that Afrocentric framework to work within? You know, would you have been able to discover what you discovered outside of that framework?
Absolutely not. There's absolutely no way. And we can take it all the way back to Kemet. So this idea of steganography, right? These hidden writings. We've been coding since we started writing.
Mm-hmm.
But reading Eurocentric scholars, I would use terms like, well, you know, society at that time was largely illiterate. And if Dr. Nahusi, Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Himatia Temple, to remind me of the language that I was using, the world was largely illiterate. This was the society that was creating language. So there's a different way of presenting the information. And when you present the information differently, it kind of opens up different ideas.
Indeed. And even when we think about ancient Kemet, who's, you know, given the world writing, and you know, from the beginning, what people don't realize is that even the writing itself reflects an oral tradition type of society, you know, in many ways not, which is why you have to have the visuals in the way that they are, in terms of the actual hieroglyphs themselves being reflections of nature, or whatnot. And even the hieroglyphs themselves, the phrase for it is sesh medu necher, the words of God, you know. And so it's still talking about speech, it's still talking about the word. And so those, if you don't understand African oral traditions, African rhythm, African pedagogy, and African ways of telling, you know, saying stories or whatnot, you won't have access, you know, saying to the messages in those particular texts. And I vouch for the same thing, you know, here. Even you can have the writings right in front of you, or Zora Neale Hurston or whatnot, but if you don't have access to the African American oral tradition, you know, saying an oral culture, you won't understand what is being written, you know, there. And so, you know, how is it, you know, I don't know, because I know, you know, Dr. Asante left for a minute and came back. So were you able to, you know, sit under, you know, any of his classes, or Dr. Arma Mazama? We know you mentioned Dr. Nahusi. We've had him on the program recently, you know, as well, a good friend and colleague. But, you know, how is it, you know, learning, you know, under these pioneers, these strategies for interpreting, you know, African phenomena?
I am grateful. I am grateful. So the year I started at Temple was the year that Dr. Asante came back.
Okay.
And he was my professor. He still mentors me. You know, I keep in touch, but he supports his students. He supports me. And so I still keep in touch. He was chair of my dissertation committee. Dr. Mazama, Dr. Nahusi, and Dr. Christopher Johnson, Dr. Crystal Temple were all members of my dissertation committee. And I wouldn't have wanted anybody else. Crystal Temple, you know, the Africologist is very centered in literature. Dr. Asante, and definitely Afrocentricity of the history itself. Dr. Nahusi, you know, this Kemet historian and specialist, and Dr. Mazama, of course, is the Afrocentric paradigm. She's the third part of it. So to have and to be able to work with them through this journey, I wouldn't have wanted it any other way. It's an honor to call myself their student.
One of the things I want to get across to the audience is that, you know, Afrocentricity is not simply a term. Afrocentric is not simply a term that is used and tossed around. It is an actual part of a discipline. Africology is a discipline, and people go to school and get degrees in this, and there's methods and theories and things surrounding this. And so, just because you speak about Black people or allegedly Black things doesn't make you, African centered or it being Afrocentricity in things of that nature. And so I want people to really kind of understand that. And then we had recently a brother, Dr. Abdul Karim Bangura, who resides in DC. He's the brother who has 5 PhDs in 3 master's degrees. And, one of his latest books that came out in 2019 is Branches of Asanteism. And, he talks about the kind of the scientific nature of Afrocentricity. And he kind of outlines the various scholars, who have used that approach in very, scholastic and scientific ways. And so I just recently got it, so I'm still going through it. I read the chapter on Ama Mazama, of course, on Molefi Kete Asante. And there's a number of other, epistemologies and frameworks that come out of that. And so, I want to, I bring, for example, this text to understand that, there's some work. Just because you are Black and you think you have some knowledge about Black people doesn't make you an African, an Afrocentric, saying researcher or an Africologist. There's methods, there's texts, there's theories and things. There's people that you have to know and have to have read, to kind of understand this this field. And so I wanted to, introduce, to my audience at least, and to the world in general, these scholars. And so that, who the scholars are in the field and what differentiates them from people who just talk Black and or whatnot. So that's one of the things that again, I appreciate about, the Temple School and just, Africology in general has really helped shape my work and things of that nature. But, before, we wrap up soon, can you tell them where they can, purchase the book? And if you have any other works, you mentioned some other things. I know, well, one text that you mentioned in the text is no longer available. I guess that first, poetry thing. But if there's any, other texts that you might want to mention, but at least where can they get the reflections of Africology, of an Africologist?
At lulu.com right now. That's LULU.com. And they can search for Reflections of an Africologist. It'll be available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and a few international online bookstores in the upcoming weeks. But right now, today, they can get it at LU. And there's, volume 1, which was Sacred Songs. I knew when I made it, I numbered it. It's a limited edition. They were handmade, raffia tie. And those initial investors, said, one day, thank you for investing in my dream. One day, hopefully they'll be worth something, because I'm not making them anymore.
All right.
2 through 9 now. Oh, except for the volume 8, because those are for the families, the living biography series. So volume 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9 are all on the.
No problem. Hold on one sec. Okay, so I just typed into the chat, which should have hit both Facebook and YouTube, that if you have any questions that you want to ask our guests, please type them in now in the chat, either on Facebook or on YouTube, and I will be sure to ask our guest your questions. So, what are some goals that you have ultimately? Like, what is the end game in terms of what do you want to do with what you do? Like, what is your plans? What would you like to see manifest in the near or far, saying future? And then the attached to that question is, what do you want your long-term impact to be in not only the field of Africology, but amongst the African world community in general? So if that made sense.
Short-term goals include doing more of what I'm doing more teaching, more writing, creating more anti-racist. One of the things that I love about teaching is I have my students reflect. I always say I wouldn't have them doing something that I wouldn't do. So I always have them reflect on the semester. And a lot of perspectives have changed. A lot of realizations, have arisen. And so some students, from this point on, I'm going to be an anti-racist. From this point on. So I want to be part of that. I think that is definitely needed. I would like to continue with 10 Million Stories series because I want to document my history. And I want to show people the growth. I'm definitely not perfect. And I haven't even told half of the stuff that I've experienced. But if people can understand that, like they say, where there's a will, there's a way. Just understand from my living, if you make your decision to do something, it's going to be hard regardless of whether you go for your dreams or not. So you might as well struggle towards something. Ultimately, I'd like to be that professor with the house by the beach somewhere off the coast of Western Africa with my office, writing and teaching by appointment only. Yeah, more of what I'm doing.
Indeed. And it's interesting that you mentioned in a unique way, kind of a genealogy in a sense. And we're scheduling right now a professor out of Louisiana who does genealogical work. She's actually helped me in my personal genealogy work that is still an ongoing process now. And so she's going to be a part of the program. We would have scheduled her for like kind of early this week, but again, she's in Louisiana. And so we're just trying to see, how things play out as a result of the hurricanes. And this is Dr. Claudette Smith Brown, for those who may know her out of New Orleans. And so, that is an important theme in terms of documenting, our own personal history. So, for at least for me, a lot of people know me. I like to go way back, to Paleolithic times and, Neolithic, and just far out. We can't imagine how far back that stuff is. But a lot of times we neglect what is, just the history of our immediate family, going back to even grandma or whatnot. And sometimes we, and I think this is more so with women, because women tend to write more journals than men. But like, this is something that I would encourage a lot of brothers to do, especially, when you're thinking about your future generations, and if they can have access to those books so that they can, see your experiences. Because a lot of times, we don't get that history of the everyday life and emotion or roller coasters and experiences that our parents and grandparents and great grandparents have gone through. And so I think that if we had, kind of text, even kind of like what you've done in the spirit of even like with ancient Egypt, with the Sibayetes. So these were the, they didn't have Bibles. They just had wisdom reflections that the parents would write down for the children. And they would pass that down. These were your Bibles, were the information given to you through your lineage. And I think that, I don't know if that was an intent, but like I can see that being part of the mission, and encouraging a lot of us to do that.
Add to the mention. I can add that. So symbiotes.
Yeah.
It's going to show up again probably in volume 10. Yeah, I like that idea though. And my grandmother Carly kept a book of family names, which was how we were able to trace our genealogy. And know the names of our people, because in Virginia, you know how they came through and burned all the libraries and stuff. But one of my ancestors held on to some paper. And so the tradition was passed on to my father's mother, who used to send me newspaper clippings. She was in Philadelphia and we were in San Francisco at the time. And she would clip out newspaper clippings or send me readings. She was grooming me to do exactly what I'm doing now.
Indeed. We have a question from Phil James, who asks, how do Blacks move forward in this 21st century, and why don't we support one another more in terms of group economics?
Ooh, I wish I had the answer to that. If I did, we'd all be there. As far as supporting Black people, don't worry about what other Black people aren't doing. You just do. Make that a part of your day-to-day. If people don't want to hop on the train, then they're not. But if you make the decision, then you might be the example for somebody else to follow. Black people do support Black people. So when we hear that, I think immediately of propaganda. We do support each other. But think about who owns airwaves, who owns the propaganda machines, who owns the media. So what gets put out there most? What get advertised most? But on a community level, we support each other. We barter, right? I'll trade you. I have some friends now that are bartering. I'll trade this portrait for this book, or I'll trade you this. So we do it on a smaller level. What we have to do is, I won't even say smaller level, we do it on a different level. What we need is what we need. But again, don't worry about what other people are doing. You just make sure you send and let them follow you.
Indeed. I think that is a point that a lot of us miss, is that you can't control anyone. All you can do is be the example that you would want others to be. So we, instead of working on being consistent in our own lives and being an inspiration for others, we are worried about what they are or aren't doing, per se, as if you can have any kind of control over that. And so I appreciate that answer. And so we have another question coming from, and I don't know how to pronounce the first name, so if I murder this first name, please forgive me. But it seems like Anai Monroe. She asks, I think it is very convenient for genealogy sites to say that they can only go back a few thousand years to estimate our ancestors. By this time, we have spread out around the world, but place names, and it's continued, modern place names are transposed upon areas previously settled by our people. So she continues, my question is, can you explain why this is? I think it skews our results. Is that question for me or for our guest? That's my question to Miss Monroe, Miss Monroe, if I pronounce that. Okay, so she said Angie. That's how you pronounce it. So Angie. So I pronounce it that way because sometimes the J is actually an I in certain languages. So I wasn't sure. But thank you for the clarification. So she says both. It's a question for both of us. Do you want to tackle it first, if you understand the nature of the question?
from well, I'm not scientific, but I can say it's a new process. You know, it's only been around a couple of decades, and so it has to expand. You got to get more samples. Get, you know,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead.
that was
Okay. I would say that when it comes to genealogical work in terms of biological genealogy, you know, we have to do a little bit more study in terms of understanding exactly what, for example, if you're taking a DNA test and what the test measures and what it reveals. And so, for example, like if you go through AfricanAncestry.com and get a DNA test, you know, unless your, you know, haplogroup, you know, or autosomal markers are very unique and distinct, you'll usually get a group of people who it's possible that your, you know, um, pre-colonial ancestor, you know, ancestors came from. And they keep that exactly what you're talking about in mind, it because, you know, in what they could have been in one area in times past, and then, you know, had children and things that migrated and became other people, you know, in a 500, 600 year time span, and become a whole, you know, saying different group of people. And so that's why, you know, you may have uh, uh, a marker, and then they'll say you belong to like the Mande and, you know, people from Songhai and da da da, you know, but they're all in a general kind of spread in a particular area. And so, but I think that the nature of the question in which Sister Angie is asking is, if and please correct me if I'm wrong, um, in terms of identity, do we take on the identity of those individual groups, you know, or do we, or how do we move on knowing that, you know, it's varied in forms of where we come from? And if that is essentially what you're asking, my argument is that I'll speak for African Americans specifically, that we have to create, and in many ways we kind of have, but it needs to be a little bit more organized and formalized, our own identity, because we are our own unique people and we have our own revered ancestors, you know, and things of this nature, and culture that we develop as a result of the experiences here, and then of course the various cultures from the, you know, the 52 different, you know, ethnic groups that became part of the diaspora. And so with that said, you know, we would be our own group, but I'm also a pan-africanist, in that we are our own group within a pan-African, you know, experience and things of this nature. And so the way to move forward is to solidify, you know, your group and goals and culture and things, but understand it within the greater pan-African context, and then work, you know, saying within that space. And so part of the the benefits of a pan-Africanist worldview and mindset is that you create a blanket, you actually create a network of people, you know what I'm saying, from around the world that you can, let's just keep it on the economics. Someone mentioned, economics earlier in their question. And so if everyone understands and loves themselves as African people, then now we can go back to that point in terms of supporting one another, because you would want to look within the family first to have them solve your problem. So if you are, for example, someone who is into literature and sci-fi and stuff to this nature, you don't necessarily go running to other groups. You have great authors and things that you can support, whether they be on the continent or whatnot. So when you see the relationships in this very dynamic way, you're more poised to support one another and look for people within that particular family to solve your problems. And so that's the basis of economics, is interpersonal relationships. And that's what we as pan-Africanists strive, and this is one of the benefits of an African-centered a worldview and approach to not only the study of saying African people as an academic enterprise, but the internalization in terms of values and things of that nature, which help to shape our behavior. And so, hopefully, without me going all kind of which ways, I hope I answered, your question. And she says, yes, it is what I'm asking. I should do it for my European ancestors according to their charts, older than my African ancestors. I don't know what chart you're talking about there, but let me see if there's any other. If y'all have questions for me, y'all can hold them, for another time. But if you have any specific questions for our particular guest, that's what I would look for, because they know these areas in which I deal with, so they want to ask me these side questions, and so I'll give you another chance to. But before we move on, I want to I didn't upload it. Let me see. I'll upload it now. Hold on, just give me 1 second. And I see Sister Angie Monroe is saying 23andMe. Yeah, I've gotten my DNA done with 23andMe, and it has revealed, well, 23andMe, to my knowledge, doesn't do specific ethnic groups. They'll give you a general location. And so on my mother's side, they discovered that her ancestry is in Southeast Africa, in Mozambique. And so a lot of people don't talk about the Mozambique and Madagascar Africans who were taken and brought to the Americas. And so my mother's lineage was caught up in that. And then on the paternal side, for me, it goes to Europe in terms of the United Kingdom. And so I don't know the story, but we can imagine, what that was, given a time period. So that's a part of the history that has to be discussed. And it is discussed in a lot of the literature, from our ancestors and recorders of that time. But just a reminder that on Sunday is going to be another episode of The Devil's Advocate. That's where I take the position opposite of, any kind of, what's the word I want to look for? Popular position. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that that's my position. Is that I just like to argue, and this gives me a time to do it. So the topic this week, which is going to be on Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern time, is the statement Christianity and Islam make God look weak, questioning the Abrahamic faith's concept of divinity. So we're going to ultimately discuss, whether the human conceptualization of God and his God concept is sound, and the limitations of human beings trying to describe that force and its characteristics, and how we come up short by not critically thinking about this. So that's going to be the nature of the conversation. So there'll be some panelists who's going to join us, and we're going to have a healthy debate. So this is the devil's advocate, and I'll be dealing with some African religious topics on this program as well. So join me this Sunday. What is it, the 30th of August? For that at 4 p.m. So that will be an interesting conversation. For those who know about the Devil's Advocate program. So we have a question coming from Brother Tristan Samuels to the professor. How does your studying ancient Africa, such as Kemet, influence the way you look at African American literature?
Hi, Kristen. Thank you, Pam, right there. Well, it shows me that we have this unbroken tradition as creators, as innovators, and for African American people, because of this attempted disconnect, what it does is it shows me even more so, like Joseph Holloway's idea of African retention, the fact that we still have these practices. We may call them different things, now, but we're still. I consider myself a student of Session, the woman who was the co-creator of so in that tradition, it keeps me honest. I don't want to just write to create art. I know that I have to write as a form of propaganda, so there has to be a larger message, behind the story. Um, so understanding the foundations of our literature gives us more of a connection and a responsibility in the creation process.
Indeed. So I hope that answers your question, Brother Samuels. Thank you for asking. And I guess this is breaking news, and this has nothing to do with the show, but allegedly Chadwick Boseman passed away. The author of, not author, the actor, who played Jackie Robinson, and of course the Black Panther. I think it was of colon cancer or something to this nature. And so I'm seeing various different news sources that are reporting this. So we'll keep a lookout, an eye on that particular story. Yeah, that's sad news. 2020 is.
His family made. He was so young.
Yeah, it was just 43. So yeah, that's.
The 57th anniversary of the March on Washington. the anniversary of the lynching of Emmett Till. It just 2020 just tacks on, to already mile high.
Yeah. This is like I was speaking to someone, within the last 2 weeks, seeing if there's a way that we can, do 2020 over. So like when January comes, can we just start over and call it 2020? It
No, let's
just
like great. Let's skip it. Let's skip
just all together. It's just I don't know, but yeah, that's something that that's some. I have to look into this. So the first thing I think of course, is how they're gonna change the story on Black Panther, with his loss. But that's neither here nor there. So take care of yourselves, folks, in terms of your health. Again, more. I have to read more on it. So this is news to me. So if Brother Rashu wouldn't have said that in the comments, I'd have been oblivious, saying to it. But yeah, just wanted to make that known. So as we wrap up, if there's the public wanted to get more information and kind of keep up with what you're doing, how could they get in contact with you?
I think that this is an old email, but I still use it. Alice the Poet at yahoo.com.
Alice the Poet at yahoo.com. For those who have who desire to contact her directly. And don't forget to go to lulu.com and to get Reflections of an Africologist, 10 Million Stories, Volume 9, and support, our authors and professors and scholars and critical thinkers and visionaries. Is there any last words that you want to share with the audience who's listening to us live?
Black Lives
Matter. Black Lives Matter, indeed. How? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to say one of the last things that I said in the book is liberation begins in the mind, and the body will follow. So make the decision to be who you want our society. Be the changes you want.
Indeed. I was going to ask you, like, how is the scene out in Los Angeles? That kind of was the hub of, before the label, especially dealing with Rodney King, Black Lives Matter. Given the climate in 2020, what is the energy, what is the spirit of things on the ground, out there in Los Angeles, given what's been happening?
It's this unified thing. So what you're seeing in Washington, D.C., you're seeing in what you're seeing in New York, you're seeing in what you're seeing in Europe, you're seeing in LA. It's just this energy that's global at this point. So it's active. Now, I've been staying in the house quite a bit because our numbers are way up on the. And I don't think people are taking it as seriously as they should. So the city of LA right now has mandated mask wearing whenever you leave the house. Sometimes when I leave, I still see people that aren't wearing masks. And so we have this, what people are referring to are these double pandemics. So this need to fight against this horrible oppression that's killing us almost on a daily basis. and then this need to protect ourselves from this pandemic that we still don't know, enough about. But what I can say is actively, like today, as a matter of fact, that there was a large gathering to commemorate the 57th anniversary of the March on Washington. And so for people that aren't able to travel, as much now, they just kind of gathered here on La Brea and the Coliseum and drove. So people are still active, people are still visual, but things are definitely modified.
Indeed, indeed. Well, thank you greatly for blessing, this channel with your presence and valuable insight. And I look forward to seeing and reading more of your work and insights. And I appreciate, again, you coming here and engaging, with my audience. So for those who are listening, make sure that you like and share the conversation, keep it going and tell your friends all about Dr. Nicholas and the work that she's doing. And, when things open up, hopefully she'll have an open mic night somewhere and you can get on her stage and read your poetry there with her. So thank you again for coming and engaging us on your busy schedule and day.
Thank you.
And you're welcome. So that'll be it for tonight. I got some other work to do, but in the meantime, if y'all want to get in contact with me, these are my social media locations and addresses. And so, hit me up anytime. And thanks to all of those who have donated to the channel. Your gifts are very much appreciated, and y'all can continue to do so even after the program, is over. So with that said, I will see y'all on Sunday. And matter of fact, I'll be taking show topics, for the different programs that we have in the future. So if there's someone who you think that I should have a conversation with, let me know, and I'll see if I can make it happen. And so I appreciate everyone for listening. Keep the conversation going. Please like and share, and I will see you all later. Peace.